The frost came 3 weeks early that year, and it should not have been possible because I had checked the valley's old warning bells myself the night before, and every one of them had stayed silent. My name is Corwin Ashdale, and my family had grown wine grapes on the same terrace hillside for 4 generations, through droughts, through wars, through a blight that had once nearly ended us entirely, and none of those disasters had ever arrived without warning the way that frost did, silent and total, killing an entire season's harvest in a single night while the bells that should have rung to save it hung frozen and useless in the dark. I stood among the ruined vines at dawn with my hands blistering from cold I had not dressed properly to meet, and I understood, with a certainty that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with 26 years of knowing this land, that the frost had not simply arrived. It had been let in. The bells were rigged to a warning system my grandfather had built himself. Copper wire strung along the ridgeline, connected to thermometers buried at intervals through the vineyard, designed to ring the moment temperatures dropped low enough to threaten the fruit. I had tested that system myself 2 days prior. It had worked perfectly, and yet on the one night it mattered most, every bell along that ridge had failed simultaneously, an impossibility that had only one honest explanation, and that explanation was sabotage. I said nothing of my suspicion to the household that morning. I had learned, in the 2 years since my father's death left me managing Ashdale Vineyard alone, that suspicion spoken aloud too soon only warned the guilty to cover their tracks more carefully, and I intended, whatever the cost to my own pride, to find out precisely who among the people I trusted had wanted to see this harvest fail. There were only a handful of people who understood the warning system well enough to disable it without leaving obvious signs of tampering, and each of them had, in the weeks before that frost, given me some small reason for doubt. I had been too occupied with the harvest itself to examine closely. My vineyard manager, Silas Petrie, had inherited his position from his own father the same year I inherited mine, and had seemed, in recent months, increasingly resentful of decisions I made without consulting him first, decisions he felt his decades of experience entitled him to weigh in on. My cousin Adeline, who managed our accounts and had quietly proposed, twice that autumn, that we sell a portion of the northern terraces to a neighboring estate whose offer I had twice refused, had grown noticeably colder toward me since my second refusal. And there was the neighboring estate's owner himself, Rowan Blackwell, a man whose family had coveted the Ashdale terraces for 2 generations and who had, at the harvest festival only a fortnight earlier, made a comment about how a single bad season could change a man's mind about selling that I had dismissed at the time as idle provocation. I decided, standing in that ruined vineyard, that the only way to draw the truth into daylight was to let all 3 of them believe the frost had accomplished exactly what its saboteur intended. I let it be known, quietly and convincingly, through the kind of careful gossip that travels faster than any announcement, that the failed harvest had broken Ashdale Vineyard financially, that I was drowning in debts my father had left hidden, that I was, within the month, likely to be forced into selling the very terraces Rowan Blackwell had coveted for years, at whatever price I could get before the bank took the land outright. None of it was true. My father, whatever his faults, had left the estate in careful order, and one poor harvest, however devastating to watch, would not by itself bankrupt us. But a frightened, cornered man makes for very convincing bait, and I intended to see which of my 3 suspects moved first to take advantage of my supposed collapse. Adeline moved first, though not in the way I expected. She came to me 3 days later, not with an offer to buy, but with the household ledgers spread open on my father's old desk, and an expression I had never seen on her before, something between fear and fierce, protective anger. I did not sabotage the bells, she said, before I had even finished closing the study door. But I believe I know who did, and I have been afraid to say so because I did not trust that you would believe me over him. She laid out, entry by careful entry, a pattern of missing funds she had traced through the estate accounts over the previous 8 months, small but consistent withdrawals authorized under Silas Petrie's signature for vineyard supplies that, upon closer examination, had never actually been purchased. Silas had been quietly embezzling from the estate for the better part of a year, and Adeline believed, though she had no direct proof of the bells themselves, that a ruined harvest serving as cover for a larger financial collapse would have suited a man desperate to hide a theft from ever being properly audited. You proposed selling the northern terraces, I said. Twice. I assumed €1. You assumed I wanted Blackwell's money, she said, with something sharper in her voice than I had ever heard her use with me. I proposed it because I was trying to raise capital quietly enough to cover what Silas had already taken before you discovered the shortfall yourself and thought me responsible for missing it. I did not want to accuse a man who has worked this land since before either of us was born without proof enough to be certain. I confronted Silas that same evening in the equipment barn where the warning system's control box was kept and watched a man who had known me since infancy try, for the length of several increasingly desperate sentences, to explain away 8 months of falsified receipts. He did not, in the end, confess to the frost itself. He confessed instead, with a bitterness that surprised me more than the theft had, to something I had not anticipated at all. I did not touch those bells, he said. Whatever Adeline believes I have done, and yes, I have taken money I should not have, money I told myself I was owed after 30 years of decisions this family never once let me make freely. I did not risk this harvest to hide it. I would have found some other way, some slower way. Ruining an entire season only draws the kind of scrutiny a thief like me should have prayed to avoid. I believed him, not out of any remaining loyalty, but because his logic held together in a way that a guilty man's panicked excuses rarely do, and because it left me exactly where I had started, with a sabotaged warning system and one suspect remaining who had both motive and opportunity that Silas, for all his theft, did not. Rowan Blackwell received me at his own estate 2 days later with the easy, confident hospitality of a man who believed he had already won, offering wine from his own cellars and speaking, with barely concealed satisfaction, of how unfortunate this season's frost had been for the Ashdale terraces, and how he remained, of course, prepared to make a generous offer whenever I felt ready to discuss the northern boundary. The bells failed the same night the frost came, I said, watching his face carefully across the rim of my untouched glass. Every one of them, simultaneously, on the only night in 4 generations they have ever failed at all. Something flickered behind his composed expression, quick and involuntary. The particular stillness of a man recalculating how much I already knew. A regrettable coincidence, he said. It was not a coincidence, I said. It was copper wire, cut cleanly enough to require tools and knowledge of the system's exact layout, which only a handful of people possess. I've already ruled out 2 of them. That leaves very few names remaining on my list, Mr. Blackwell, and I find I have grown considerably more direct in my inquiries since the harvest we were discussing. He did not confess outright, not that evening, but he did something nearly as revealing. He set down his glass, and for the first time since I had arrived, his easy confidence seemed to cost him some visible effort to maintain, and he told me, in the careful language of a man choosing every word to avoid admitting anything a court could later use against him, that he had heard from an unnamed source that Ashdale's warning system had grown unreliable with age, and that he could not be held responsible for repairs I had apparently neglected. It was Adeline, in the end, who found the proof that broke his careful denials, a groundskeeper on Blackwell's own estate. a young man named Toby who had been paid a sum he could not otherwise explain the week before the frost, and who, once Adeline gently and patiently earned his trust over several quiet conversations, admitted that Rowan Blackwell had directed him to climb the ridgeline under cover of darkness and cut the warning wires at 4 specific points, in exchange for money Toby had desperately needed and had not fully understood the consequences of earning. I brought the boy's sworn statement, along with the physical evidence of the cut wires themselves, which Silas, in an apparent effort to redeem some fraction of his own guilt, had helped me document precisely, to the county magistrate the following week, and Rowan Blackwell's easy confidence did not survive the proceedings that followed. He was made to pay restitution for the ruined harvest, a sum that, I confess, gave me less satisfaction than I had expected, because no payment could restore the vines themselves, which would take 3 full seasons to recover their former yield. Silas Petrie, I did not send to the magistrate. I gave him a choice instead: restitution of every shilling he had taken, paid in full over however many years it required, and his continued employment at reduced authority, or immediate dismissal and a formal accusation. He chose restitution, and works the vineyard still, though something has changed permanently in how carefully I now review every signature that crosses my desk. Adeline I made full partner in the estate's management before the following spring, a decision I should have made years earlier and did not, out of a stubbornness about my father's legacy that I am no longer certain served either of us well. The vines are recovering now, slow and stubborn the way all things worth keeping tend to be, and some mornings, walking the terraces before dawn, I still find myself listening for the bells, half expecting silence, before I remember that the new wire Adeline insisted we install runs underground now, buried too deep for any man's careful knife to reach. I have learned, since that frost, that the greatest danger to anything worth protecting rarely announces itself with the violence of storm. It arrives quietly, in the space between what you assume is safe and what someone else has quietly decided to take from you. And the only defense against it is the same patience my grandfather once used to build those bells in the first place, a willingness to listen carefully, long after everyone else has stopped believing there is anything left to hear.